Could a simple 10-second penalty be the start of the biggest refereeing scandal in the modern history of Formula One? Stick around, because what you're about to discover could change your perspective on how decisions are made in F1. Subscribe to continue uploading more of this type of content now, if we continue. The penalty imposed on Hamilton was 10 seconds. The reason? Go off the track and obtain a lasting advantage, a phrase that seems technical and clear in the regulations, but in this specific case it became a subjective concept, full of nuances, that generated more questions than answers. But what was truly serious was not only the penalty itself, but the administrative contradictions that were revealed afterwards. Official FIA documents issued minutes apart expressed completely opposite conclusions about the same maneuver, about the same incident, and about the same driver. One of them validated Hamilton's actions, pointing out that the physical circumstances of the incident prevented him from complying with the reinstatement protocol. The other punished him harshly for the consequences of that impossibility. This conflict between regulations and technical reality not only ruined a possible celebration for Hamilton and Ferrari, but also lit a dangerous fuse within the paddock. What should have been a day of celebration became the trigger for an earthquake of statements, criticism, and general distrust towards the sport's administration. And not only from the media. Drivers, team managers, former champions, and even analysts with decades of experience agreed on one point: this cannot happen again. Because at the heart of Formula One, where pinpoint precision and regulatory fairness should be sacred, what happened in Mexico made it clear that something is deeply broken. This episode is not just another anecdote. It is the reflection of a system that, when it contradicts itself in official documents, is no longer credible. And when the stars of the show, the drivers, feel that the rules are not applied consistently, confidence in the sport begins to shake. We are not talking about a simple penalty. We are talking about a dangerous precedent that puts the very principle of competitive equity in the highest category of motorsports at stake. To understand the level of seriousness of what happened at the 2025 Mexican Grand Prix, we must decompose, step by step, the incident that triggered the scandal. The key scene happened on lap 6 of the race, but the context began to build from the beginning of Sunday. Hamilton had achieved his best starting position with Ferrari since joining the team, third on the grid, behind Lando Norris on pole and Charles Leclerc in second. Everything indicated that, finally, he would have a real opportunity to fight for a Sunday podium, something that had eluded him since he began this new stage dressed in red. The start was, as usually happens at the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez, chaotic. For cars side by side arrived at turn 1. Leclerc and Verstappen, forced by the situation, cut the track through the grass in turns 1 and 2. They emerged with an advantage. Leclerc even led the race for a few moments. Although he returned the position to Norris, he did not do the same with Hamilton, who had also been affected by that maneuver. Here an initial inconsistency was already shown, a multiple infraction that was not penalized in a clear or proportional way, but the real breaking point came a few minutes later. Hamilton was in full fight with Verstappen. In turn 1 of lap 6, the Dutchman executed an aggressive maneuver from the inside. There was contact. Verstappen was forced to go off again on the grass, and on his return, he was ahead of Hamilton. Coming into turn 4, Hamilton counterattacked by taking the outside, but the dirty asphalt outside the ideal line caused severe locking of his right front wheel. At that moment, and due to completely adverse physical conditions, lack of traction, dust, poorly managed speed, Hamilton could not take the official escape route, marked with a yellow line on the grass, as indicated in the race director's notes. And this is where everything gets complicated. Instead of following the designated path, Hamilton cut straight across the grass, emerging onto the track again about 2 seconds ahead of Verstappen. From there, a double evaluation begins by the stewards. First, whether Hamilton failed to comply with the race director's instructions by not following the escape route. Second, if he gained a lasting advantage after going off track. Under normal conditions, these are situations that are judged with technical precision, taking into account precedents, intentionality, and track context. However, the FIA issued 2 documents, the famous Document 36 and Document 37, which address the incident with mutually exclusive criteria. The first established that Hamilton should be penalized with 10 seconds for having gained a lasting advantage, one of the most severe penalties that can be applied without reaching a direct reprimand. But the second document acknowledged that, due to excessive speed at the time of the blockage, the pilot could not follow the marked yellow lane. In other words, they admitted that Hamilton did not violate the reinstatement regulation because the alternative maneuver was physically unattainable. The contradiction is chilling. Two documents signed by the same group of commissioners about the same event. One punishes, the other exonerates. This inconsistency, beyond human error, exposes a structural flaw in the way the FIA processes, interprets, and sanctions incidents in real time. Because if a pilot is penalized for not complying with an instruction that the regulations themselves recognize as impracticable at that moment, what is really being judged? The action, the intention, or the name of the pilot? Furthermore, there is a technical aggravating factor that has not been discussed enough. At the exact time of the incident, the escape route was dirty, with poor grip and poorly marked visually due to raised grass. Not only was it difficult to maneuver, but there was not enough traction to brake in a straight line and redirect the car into that area without completely losing control. Penalizing under these conditions is equivalent to punishing a pilot for not breaking the laws of physics. This technical analysis is not based only on visual observation, but on the telemetry records themselves and on the testimonies of analysts with experience in career management. Jolyon Palmer explained it clearly. Hamilton had no other reasonable option. He cut because it was that or the wall. To penalize that action is to ignore the logic of motorsports. And he wasn't the only one. Karun Chandhok and Martin Brundle also agreed that the FIA acted with ill-founded severity. This set of errors, contradictions, and omissions not only directly affected Hamilton's career in Mexico, it also sowed the seeds of widespread distrust between drivers, teams, and fans. Because if what is written can be ignored, and if the interpretation changes depending on the document that is read, what is the real framework of justice in Formula One? What came after the Mexican Grand Prix was not just a wave of indignant comments. It was a coordinated, spontaneous, and massive reaction that revealed something deeper than a specific error, the loss of confidence in the Formula One sports justice system. The pilots, those who are directly exposed to the consequences of each decision on the track, did not take long to react. George Russell was one of the first to speak out. The Briton, known for his diplomatic and controlled profile, set aside formalities and declared, "We are competing at the limit every weekend. We cannot be worried that the rules will change depending on who is involved." This was a clear injustice. His message was not only solidarity with Hamilton, but a warning to the FIA. The drivers will no longer tolerate arbitrary decisions. Fernando Alonso, another who does not usually keep quiet when something smells bad in Formula One, was even more direct. This is not a sport, it is a lottery. Today it was Hamilton. Tomorrow it could be anyone. You can't apply a sanction when you yourself admit that there was no way to avoid the incident. In what world does that make sense? Alonso spoke with the clarity of someone who has been observing the evolution of the regulations and their fissures for decades, and his testimony resonated deeply with public opinion. And then there was Hamilton. With a steady gaze and a calm but firm voice, he explained his position bluntly. "I'm not going to say that it surprises me, but it does disappoint. We have always asked for consistency. Today we saw exactly the opposite. I was penalized for a situation that was physically and technically impossible to avoid. It's all in the document, the FIA recognizes it, so what is the logic behind the punishment?" His statement, far from seeking controversy, was a precise exposition of the contradiction incurred by the governing body. From the world of analysts and former pilots, the criticism was not minor. Martin Brundle called it one of the most worrying decisions I have seen in years, and Karun Chandhok stated that the FIA has gotten itself into a mess from which it is going to be very difficult to get out. Jacques Villeneuve, always provocative, went further. "This is what happens when you let decisions be contaminated by factors external to the regulations. They penalize Hamilton to prevent the narrative from being that Verstappen was wrong. It's that simple." The strongest reaction, however, came from within the paddock. Ferrari, which has taken a more measured stance on public protests in recent years, could not remain silent. Frederic Vasseur, team boss, called an extraordinary conference on the Monday after the GP, and there he launched a phrase that resonated throughout the international press: "We have been victims of a systematic failure." The FIA issued two opposing judgments on the same fact. "We will not only ask for a review, we will ask for a reform of the decision-making process. This cannot happen again." Beyond the speech, Ferrari sent a formal protest to the FIA requesting a review of the case under Article 14 of the sporting regulations, which allows appeals when there is new evidence or procedural errors. In this case, the new evidence was the official document that contradicts the initial sanction. An irony that, in itself, shows the administrative chaos in which the organization finds itself. The controversy in Mexico starkly exposes the imbalance between the written regulations and their application on the track. And the most dangerous thing about this case is not the penalty to Hamilton, but the precedent it establishes. Because if today it is valid to punish the physically inevitable, tomorrow anyone can be penalized for similar situations. And so how do you compete? How do you plan a strategy? How do you explain to a generation of young pilots that they must trust a system that punishes without logic? Subscribe to continue uploading more of that content. Now you really think about all this.